Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and ever since I started this channel, I wanted to do a gangster movie. Based on the book Wiseguy by Nicholas Pileggi, this is the true story of mafia mobster Henry Hill and his life in the Lucchese crime family. But Goodfellas is much more than just another gangster film. In my opinion, it is the best mafia movie ever made. You can't deny its impact, because after Goodfellas we got a surge of excellent mobster movies in the 90s. But it was Goodfellas that paved the way and has now become a huge part of our pop culture.
How am I funny?
I don't know, you say funny things.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I said you're swell, that's all.
You saying that I got a big head? Is that what you're saying? What am I, a bloated, puffy roundhead here to amuse you? I make you laugh. I'm here to fucking amuse you.
Well, your gangster rap certainly amuses me. Oh yeah, I'm deadly serious. This actually happened. Joe Pesci, the star of Goodfellas, had a rap song called Wiseguy. This is what you're watching right now. You have to see it to believe it.
Hey, paid with a stash. Treat all my bros like trash. You'll catch a blast if you move too fast. I talk with class, you don't have to ask. Getting everything by flashing cash.
Oh my god, it's so awful. What? Oh, come on, mate. I'm only kidding.
Sometimes you don't sound like you're kidding. You know, there's a lot of people around.
I was only kidding. You can't expect to make a shitty hip-hop music video and not be made fun of. But okay, fine. Maybe I've taken it a bit too far. I promise not to make any more jokes, okay? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. It's okay.
Okay, cool. Sorry to you guys as well for getting a little sidetracked. There's a lot I want to talk about in this review. So, as always, I'll be discussing the true story the film is based on and how much did it get right. So let's not waste any more time. This is Goodfellas. Henry Hill was born in 1943 and was raised in a rundown part of Brooklyn, New York, to an Irish father and Sicilian mother. Along with his 6 other siblings, he grew up in a typical blue-collar working-class family. Already from an early age, life's prospects seemed limited to Henry as he suffered from a multitude of learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity, none of which had been diagnosed at the time, which meant his difficulty with school was met with very little sympathy.
Even the fucking principal one day told me, I got a bad voice, right? And I can't carry a fucking tune. And my principal told me, shh, Henry, hum. Don't sing the national anthem. Imagine that. Imagine being told you can't sing the fucking national anthem. That so sucked. I mean, so, you think I liked school? No, I didn't. And then when I went to school, I'd be sitting in the fucking corner looking at the wall because they thought I was a fuck-up.
Because they weren't able to understand what was going on, the teachers at his school thought he was messing about and intentionally being disruptive. This of course led Henry to resent school, convincing him that there was no future in his education, so what was the point of even trying?
It's a letter from school. It says you haven't been there in months. In months?! You think you're so smart? You're a bum!
When I first watched this scene, I just labeled Henry as a bad kid, but after researching him, I can totally sympathize with his contempt for school. As someone who also suffered from severe dyslexia and dyspraxia, I didn't have a fun time in school either, and I actually had support, whereas Henry didn't. So he really didn't have a chance.
And they used to get on top of me too and smack me in the back of the fucking head. You know, learn this. Yeah, okay. I didn't know the alphabet until I was like in my 20s. Honest to God, this is the truth. And it was fucked up growing up. But these guys gave me a lot of attaboys and a lot of money. You know what I mean? For doing nothing. I didn't think I was doing any fucking thing wrong.
The guys he's talking about were members of Paul Vario's crew, a capo in the Lucchese crime family. Across the street from his house was a cab stand which operated as one of their fronts. From his bedroom window, Henry would watch these mobsters step out of their expensive Cadillacs with their flash jewelry and tailored suits. He found their whole lifestyle to be intoxicating, and it was this small glimpse into their world that convinced him that he wanted to be one of them. He started off by getting a job at the cab stand and doing menial tasks like dropping off packages, parking their cars, but he loved the glamour of it and above all, feeling valued.
See, people like my father could never understand, but I was a part of something. I belonged. I was treated like a grown-up.
Harry, look, Henry, tell him 519. It's a bad
Every day I was learning to score. $1 here, $1 there. I was living in a fantasy.
Bit by bit, his responsibilities at the cab stand became less harmless and increasingly illegal. Instead of dropping off packages, he was selling stolen cigarettes. Instead of parking cars, he was blowing them up. The lack of an education he would have normally have gotten in school was now being replaced by one made on the streets. Arguably, the most important lesson he ever learned was when he got busted at the age of 16.
Congratulations. Here's your graduation present.
What for? I got pinched.
Everybody gets pinched, but you did it right. You told them nothing, and they got nothing.
I thought you'd be mad.
Man, I'm not mad. I'm proud of you. You took your first pinch like a man, and you learned the two greatest things in life.
What?
Look at me. Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
However, what the movie doesn't show was that right around this time, young Henry was having some strong reservations about the direction his life was taking him. After his arrest when he was 16, he started thinking of how to get out.
And I realized, when I was about 16, 17, they start asking me to do more things for them, you know what I mean? I says, fuck this shit ain't right. I says, I'm getting out of this fucking business.
In 1960, Henry joined the 82nd Airborne and left New York in an attempt to distance himself from his life of crime. However, whilst he was there, he fell back into his old criminal habits, such as gambling, loan sharking, and stuff like that. Eventually, he got thrown into the stockade for fighting and stealing a local sheriff's car and was discharged from the army. After a few years, he returned in 1963 to New York, and it didn't take long before he was back with the mob. And the crew Henry Hill ran with was led by a man called Jimmy Burke. Now, in the movie, his character's called Jimmy Conway, and I haven't been able to find out exactly why that is, apart from legal reasons. Considering the fact that Jimmy Burke was still alive when Goodfellas came out, I'm guessing he didn't want it screwing up any chance he had for parole. So anyway, upon his return to New York, that was when Henry reunited with Jimmy Burke and was taught the ropes on more lucrative criminal activities. The biggest moneymaker for the crew, of course, was hijacking trucks coming out of JFK Airport. $30 billion of cargo would pass through it every year, and they had such a well-planned system that at times, they would be able to hijack 2 to 3 trucks a day. Eventually it got so bad that the United States government made a film warning drivers. However, it was kind of pointless because according to Henry Hill, up to 75% of the time, the drivers were in on it.
So you gotta understand, we grew up near the airport. It belonged to Paulie. And we had friends and relatives who worked all over the place, and they would tip us off about what was coming in and what was moving out. If any of the truckers or airlines gave us any trouble, Paulie had his union people scare them with a strike. It was beautiful. It was an even bigger moneymaker than numbers, and Jimmy was in charge of it all. Whenever we needed money, we'd rob the airport.
And that's exactly what they did, and for about 4 years they made a lot of money. But then an opportunity came along in 1967 that would put Henry Hill on the map in the eyes of the Mafia. The Air France robbery.
Big score coming from Air France. Like bags of money like this coming in, okay? From tourists and American servicemen who change their money, turn it to French money, send it back here. Calm down. Okay, well, it's beautiful, but it's totally untraceable. Okay.
Now the guy talking to Jimmy and Henry is Robert Frenchy McMahon, who worked as an Air France foreman, and in the movie, he's the one who lets Henry and Tommy into the depot. In reality, he only tipped them off about the score and didn't have the keys they needed for the vault. They belonged to another guard who couldn't be bribed. But after a few weeks of watching him, one weakness of his was discovered: women. So Jimmy hatched a plan where they would get the guard blind drunk, drive him into a motel where a prostitute was waiting. As soon as he had taken off his trousers and was being distracted by the prostitute, they swiped his keys, copied them, and replaced them, leaving him none the wiser. And just like that, Henry and other mob associate Tommy DeSimone were able to wander freely into the Air France depot and walked out with nearly $500,000. As expected with true Mafia custom, the loot was shared with the Vario crew, bringing Henry a lot of respect. With his share, Henry made his final attempt to distance himself from his mob pals.
It was another way of trying to fucking, insulate myself from those fucking lunatics that, that I was partners with and, hung with,
Hoping to go legitimate, he bought a club in Queens, New York called The Suite. After a few months though, it quickly became just another mob hangout.
He just fucking followed me, you know, and the place thrived and became the fucking headquarters.
And then one event would take place in 1970 that sealed Henry's fate, and any possibility of leaving the mafia would be gone. And that was the murder of Billy Batts. Now in the movie, Tommy DeSimone kills Billy Batts over a petty argument.
Hey, Tommy, if I was gonna break your balls, I'd tell you to go home and get your shine box.
No more shines, Billy.
What?
I said no more shines. Maybe you didn't hear about it. You've been away a long time. They didn't go up there and tell you. I don't shine shoes anymore.
This is only partially true. That confrontation really did take place, but in Jimmy's bar, the Roberts Lounge, a few weeks before. The occasion was a welcome home party for Billy Batts, who just got out of prison, and Jimmy was only just able to restrain Tommy from hitting the guy. However, whilst Billy Batts was in prison, Jimmy had taken over his loan sharking rackets, and now that Billy was out, he wanted it back. And Jimmy was like, bollocks to that, I'm not giving you shit. So a few weeks later, Jimmy and Tommy worked out a plan to get Billy Batts stinking drunk in Henry's club, The Sweet, one night. And when everyone had left, that was when Tommy and Jimmy made their move.
Get the door!
I'm gonna shoot him in his big fucking mouth. Let's shoot him.
Now these psychos had killed a lot of people, but this one was different, and reason why was because Billy was a made man in the Gambino crime family. A made man was basically a special membership in the mafia, and one of its privileges was that no one could harm you without permission from your family's boss, otherwise they would get killed themselves. And to make things worse, Billy Batts had very powerful friends, one of which was John Gotti, the future boss of the Gambinos. So Henry, Jimmy and Tommy dumped Billy into the boot of their car and drove out to Connecticut to bury the body. But out on the road, however, they started hearing sounds from the boot of the car.
What is that? Jimmy.
What's up? What's up?
Did I hit something?
What the fuck is that?
Is it flat?
Flat?
What? No.
In one moment, they all knew Billy Batts was still alive.
It was sickening. It was fucking sickening. It was actually sickening, you know? And then we opened the fucking trunk and, he looked at me and he says, Henry, and he just backed the fuck up, They didn't actually shoot him. They just fucking turned, just stabbed him 30 or 40 fucking times. Fucking horrible.
Now that Henry was a witness and an accessory to the murder of Billy Batts, there was never any chance of him being able to leave the life now, not without being killed himself. So, he fully committed himself to the mob and did whatever Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke told him. In 1972, Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill were arrested for beating up Johnny Ciaccio, a gambler in Tampa, Florida, for not paying a large debt. And it turned out that the guy's sister worked for the FBI and informed her co-workers what had happened. After a lengthy investigation, pretty much everyone in the Vario crew, including Paul Vario, was sent to prison. Henry received 10 years in a federal penitentiary for interstate gambling and assault. But what's really shocking to me, and I'm sure to Henry Hill as well at the time, is that being a mobster in prison was not that bad.
When you think of prison, you get pictures in your mind of all those old movies with rows and rows of guys behind bars. But it wasn't like that for Wiseguy. I mean, everybody else in the joint was doing real time, all mixed together, living like pigs. But we lived alone. I mean, we owned the joint.
I'm going to be honest with you, I was convinced that during my research this was going to be one part of the movie that was heavily exaggerated for dramatic effect. But amazingly, only slightly. This pretty much sums up exactly how crooked the penal system was back then.
We give the impression of it being breezier than it was. To add to the irony of it, with the music that's playing and that sort of thing and getting the lobsters. But this was what we had guards who told us this is the reality too. I mean, it was all there. It's all there. I mean, there's certain people who were privileged.
And in order to have those privileges, they had to pay $2,000 to $3,000 to the guards every month. So, without being able to earn on the outside, Henry had to find new ways to earn on the inside. And that was when he started dealing drugs. Fellow prisoners would tell Henry that the amount of money he made from hijacking trucks was minuscule compared to what they had made from selling cocaine, heroin, etc. on the streets. Prison for Henry was more of a place to network with other criminals outside of his mafia circle, and he pretty much received a college education by the end of it. When he finally got out in 1978 after serving 5 years of his 10-year sentence, he immediately began using the connections he had made in prison and started dealing narcotics. However, all of this was done in secret since it was forbidden to sell drugs in the mafia. The penalty for doing so was death, so no word of this could reach Paul Vario, but he was able to bring Tommy and Jimmy in on it, and they made a lot of money. Later that same year, a score came along that would forever immortalize Jimmy Burke's crew, and make the Air France robbery look like nothing in comparison.
And these are the guys that Jimmy put together for what turned out to be the biggest heist in American history, the Lufthansa heist.
On December the 11th, 1978, acting on a tip-off from Henry and his friend Martin Krugman, Jimmy's crew broke into the Lufthansa cargo terminal and at gunpoint robbed the entire vault, walking away with nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry.
5 heavily armed and masked men today fled with an estimated $3 million in cash and $300,000 in jewelry from the Lufthansa Airlines cargo hangar at New York's Kennedy Airport.
The FBI says $2 million. Port Authority police say $4 million. The city cops say 5. Lufthansa has not said anything, but they promise to break their silence soon with a press conference. And the WINS will be there to cover it live.
However, what should have been a time for celebration, especially since they had pulled off the score of a lifetime, it didn't take long before things started descending into chaos. The truth is, these guys had no clue they were going to walk away with that amount of money. They figured that there would only be like $1 million waiting for them in the vault. By stealing $6 million, the eyes of the world were upon them, since every crook and cop in the city immediately knew that the Vario crew were responsible. And it didn't help when a few of these idiots started buying Cadillacs and mink fur coats, much to the clear disapproval of Jimmy Burke.
Name it, son. Are you stupid or what? Did you hear what I said? Don't buy anything, don't get anything, nothing big. Did you hear what I said? What's the matter with you?
And it didn't stop there. One of the robbers, Stax Edwards, was supposed to dispose of the getaway van, but instead this genius decided to drive to his girlfriend's house, get high, and fell asleep, and the next morning, the police had found the van with his fingerprints all over it. With Stax jeopardizing the entire crew, it could only end one way for him. This was the beginning of the Lufthansa murders. Jimmy Burke became increasingly paranoid with all the public attention that other members in his crew could possibly link him to the robbery. But another factor came in play: pure greed. When Jimmy's crew learned of the true amounts they had stolen, they started demanding a larger share.
Fuck him! I want my money. Henry, I want my fucking money. I had it up to here. Right. That cheap cigarette hijacking. No, fuck him.
And so Jimmy Burke, with Paul Vario's blessing, started systematically killing everyone involved in the robbery. For months, the police were finding bodies all over the place, and in total, up to 10 or so people were killed. Now you might ask yourself, why wasn't Henry killed too? Well, Henry was smart enough not to demand his share when he started seeing his mates being killed off, but Jimmy was also making a lot of money through the drugs Henry was selling. So, for the moment, he was still useful to Jimmy. But one murder would take place that Jimmy was not responsible for and would never have signed off on. Well, at least according to Henry. A week after Christmas, Jimmy and Henry were in Florida sorting out some drug deal, and Tommy remained in New York because he was going to be made. Jimmy was particularly excited because Tommy was a close friend of his. At a diner, they were waiting for the call of Tommy's initiation, when Jimmy learned they had been killed by the Gambinos for the murder of Billy Batts and another mobster called Ronald Foxy Jarove. It's been speculated that it was John Gotti himself who killed Tommy. Now there's just a couple of things I'd like to elaborate on with this murder that the film doesn't cover.
They even shot Tommy in the face, so his mother couldn't give him an open coffin at the funeral.
That's technically not true. His mother couldn't give him an open coffin simply because there was nothing in the coffin. Tommy DeSimone just disappeared and his body has never been found. There also might have been another reason why Tommy was murdered, but it's a little complicated, so I'll try to keep it simple. According to Henry Hill, Paul Vario was having an affair with his wife Karen, and when Henry was in prison, Tommy DeSimone tried to rape Karen when she turned him down for sex. When Karen told Paulie what had happened, he apparently approached the Gambinos and told them about Billy Batts, about Foxy, everything that Tommy ever did. So that reason, along with possibly wanting to remove yet another link to the Lufthansa heist, may be why Tommy was killed. But these are just theories because his murder still remains unsolved today. So by 1980, Henry was heavily addicted to the drugs he was selling, Every day he was snorting cocaine, heroin, and popping fistfuls of Quaaludes. I mean, it was getting ridiculous. I'm actually very impressed he was able to stand, let alone function.
Stop with those fucking drugs, they're making your mind into mush, you hear me?
Not only that, but this was right around the time when the FBI was really starting to clamp down on the mafia with their heavy surveillance and their high-profile arrests. With this kind of heat, it was only a matter of time before Henry got nicked. Now, what's really funny is when the police arrested Henry, they weren't able to find any drugs on him. I think they just found like a single Quaalude in his pocket or something. That was until they got to his girlfriend who'd been preparing Henry's drugs at her house and had never bothered cleaning up the place. The cops found drugs on cooking utensils, on the walls, on the carpet. I'm sure just by hoovering the place, they had a whole sack full of evidence to use against Henry.
Bye-bye, dickhead.
Henry was now screwed in more ways than one. Not only was he facing 25 years to life, but he also had to worry about Paul Vario because he had broken the mafia's strict law against selling drugs, and he had now become a liability to Jimmy Burke because he was the last survivor of the Lufthansa heist.
I knew Paulie was going to whack me, Jimmy was going to whack me, you know. It was so fucking crazy.
With no way out, Henry became the very thing he had always hated, a rat. He cooperated with the FBI for full immunity and told them everything about the Lufthansa heist, all the scams, the rackets, the murders, the robberies, the hijackings, everything he had ever witnessed in his life with the mob. His testimonies put away 50 mobsters behind bars, including Jimmy Burke and Paul Vario. The evidence presented by Henry really shook the criminal underworld and showed the public just how much of a grip La Cosa Nostra had on American society.
We ran everything. We paid off cops, we paid off lawyers, we paid off judges. Everybody had their hands out. Everything was for the taking. And now it's all over.
And it really was for Henry. He and his family went into witness protection and were moved to Omaha, Nebraska under new identities. It was a second chance for Henry to start over again, but he was never able to truly move on from his criminal past. He became heavily addicted to drugs and especially alcohol, and in 1987, he was arrested on drug trafficking charges in Seattle. Eventually, due to his repeated criminal offenses, he was kicked out of the witness protection program. And pretty much ever since then, the only way he can make any real money was by constantly reliving his life in the mafia. So it's not surprising to me why Henry Hill became such an alcoholic when he was always being reminded of the horrible things he did during his interviews for books, movies, radio shows, and documentaries.
Some guys leave the life and go quietly about their business. Others leave the life and make it a career that they've left the life. They're out of the life, but they still want to cash in on the life, and they're making it a payday.
It was a culture shock, to say the least, with a book deal and a movie deal. You know, I mean, I thought I was going to be left alone and open up a little mom and pop restaurant, because I'd always owned restaurants or nightclubs. You know, just fade away into the, into the land of happy destiny. It didn't turn out that way.
When I said earlier that Goodfellas is the best mafia movie ever made, I really meant it, and I think by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why I believe it is. But when I decided to review it, I did not want to make the same points everyone else has made. I mean, it's like some people have forgotten about what made this film great in the first place, and they can only identify iconic performances and great camera work.
You gotta admit that the Steadicam shot in Goodfellas was the mud.
And then there are some people who don't even do that. They just worship Goodfellas based on his cult status.
What's up, movie monsters? As we make our way through the legendary IMDb Top 250, we've already seen some pretty great movies so far, but now we're up for something good. It's in the name. Made by legendary Wolf of Wall Street director Sir Martin Scorsese. He scores! Let's break down all the reasons this movie rocks. Number 1 came out in 1990. Die Hard 2. Back to the Future Part 3. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Goodfellas. Talk about era of the instant classic.
Great Scott. I know, this is heavy.
Don't believe the hype? Check out who else agrees with me. The Academy of Arts and Sciences, Hollywood Foreign Press Association, British Academy of Film and Television Nickelodeon Arts, Kids' Choice, American Cinema Editors.
Does this guy look familiar?
Believe it or not, this is actually the same dude from Home Alone. Can't unsee it. Hashtag.
Oh my god, I hate YouTube sometimes. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that if we look past the gloss, past the camera work, and past the performances, you will still find plenty of really cool stuff to talk about. Like, for example, how groundbreaking and authentic Goodfellas is with its portrayal of the mafia and actual history. In fact, by exploring this, I think you can appreciate Goodfellas even more, because what this film does very well is that it counters the romantic image of the mob, an image that began in the 1930s with gangster classics such as The Public Enemy, Little Caesar, and of course, the original Scarface. These films were based on the crimes of the day and real-life mobsters who were glamorized by the public, and since these gangster films were almost an urban extension of the Western, the same myth-like status old outlaws had, such as Billy the Kid and Jesse James, were now applied to mobsters like Lucky Luciano and Al Capone. So the romanticized depiction of the mafia would continue, even with one of the greatest films in American cinema, The Godfather. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate from this from the comment section, but The Godfather is not a great example of authenticity. I mean, first and foremost, it's based on a book by Mario Puzo, and what's presented on the screen is very operatic. I mean, it's larger than life, and idolizes admirable qualities such as honor and respect that the mafia were not really interested in. And also another thing to consider is that when The Godfather was made, the mafia were at the height of their power, and they even used it to influence this movie directly.
Around that time, the producer of The Godfather came to visit Joe Colombo. He sent for him. And Joey actually looked at the script of The Godfather back then. And he took any reference to the word mafia, he pulled it out of the script.
Getting the Justice Department of the United States to ban the use of the word mafia. That's pretty good political power.
Kind of makes you wonder what else might have been changed or omitted from the script. But anyway, that's just my opinion with The Godfather. It's a brilliant work of art, but it's pure fantasy as far as I'm concerned. Whereas Goodfellas definitely comes the closest in just showing us how psychotic these bastards really were. I mean, their power was not based off honor and respect, but fear and intimidation, which they used brutally and effectively. And since everyone was terrified of these lunatics, they had free reign to do whatever they wanted. Like, for example, this scene. Now, according to Henry Hill, this actually happened. During one card game, the bartender, Michael Spider Gianco, forgot to bring Tommy his drink. An extremely drunk and enraged Tommy demanded that Spider dance for him and shot him in the foot. A week later, Spider was serving drinks and Tommy began mocking his leg cast, to which Spider replied,
"Why don't you go fuck yourself, Tommy?"
Everybody began laughing, even Jimmy Burke, who congratulated Spider on standing up to Tommy. But when Jimmy started poking fun at Tommy, that was obviously too much for him.
Tom, you gonna let him get away with that? You gonna let this fucking punk get away with that? What's the matter? What's the world coming to?
The fucking world is coming to. How do you like that?
Now, you might say to yourself, but of course Tommy did that. He was a total psycho in the movie. Well, if you start researching into the real people these characters are based on, you will see that they are all just as violent as Tommy. Even Paul Vario, who's presented in the movie as a father figure to Henry, used excessive violence. There was one occasion when a young Henry was driving around with Paul, and he saw for the first time what Paul Vario was capable of.
Took the fucking baseball bat out of the back of the fucking car, walks in the fucking bar, and I could see it, you know, from where I was. And he starts hitting the fucking barmaid with this fucking baseball bat. I mean, beating the shit out of this fucking woman, you know, broke her fucking collarbone. She ratted on him that he was going out with it, you know, to his fucking wife or some bullshit, you know, it was just, you know, stupid shit like that. But I mean, fucking holy fuck, because, you know, I never seen that part of him.
As you can clearly see, these were not noble gangsters living by a code of honor. They terrorized the communities they lived in. In fact, these were just a few of the many more stories that I would encourage anyone to look up if they're interested in. The technical achievements of Goodfellas are all made to support this theme of authenticity, which I feel is sometimes overlooked. Like, for example, when we look at the famous funny house scene. I gotta say that even though Joe Pesci looks nothing like the real Tommy DeSimone, who was like 6'2" and weighed about 225 pounds, this movie absolutely nails his character. If you're a film geek like I am, then I'm sure you're aware that the whole scene was improvised and based on a real-life experience Joe Pesci once had. Yet, it's totally appropriate. Henry Hill himself said that he lived in fear every day of his life. This little scene shows us that these criminals can flip out at any given moment.
Well, let me understand this, because maybe it's me, I'm a little fucked up, maybe. But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you. I make you laugh. I'm here to fucking amuse you. What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
Not just... You know how you tell a story. What?
No, I don't know. You said it. How do I know? You said I'm funny. How the fuck am I funny? What the fuck is so funny about me? Tell me. Tell me what's funny.
Your music career?
Motherfucking mutt! You fucking piece of...
Well, that about wraps up my review for Goodfellas. This was a film I've been wanting to do for a while now, and it truly does deserve its spot as one of the greatest films ever made. Does its technical achievements in the craft of filmmaking deserve praise? Yes, of course it does, and it's not my intention to dismiss it. But I just get frustrated when that is the only thing people talk about, and they just skip over the incredible story Goodfellas is telling. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with someone who insists that Goodfellas is one of their favourite movies, but they are completely oblivious that it's based on a true story. And yet that same person will tell me in great detail how awesome the editing sequence is when Henry is coked up and running his errands. Now, I know how incredibly sensitive people get when their favourite movies face criticism, so I'm doing my best to word it as carefully as I can. All I want to do with this review is shine a light on something I feel is often overlooked in favour of filming techniques. Like, that stuff is cool, but let's not forget about everything else that made it cool to begin with. The biggest challenge any historical film faces is how much does it get right, and I'd say Goodfellas is about 80 to 90% accurate. Of course, creative liberties are taken with details being changed with the characters, or the timeline, or events taken out entirely, but the end result of this film shows me just how much of an effort Martin Scorsese made in getting the story right. That alone is worthy of recognition and praise. And that's all I really wanted to say. I mean, hopefully I gave you something else to think about and not just obsess over that bloody Steadicam shot.
Oh my god, top 5, number 1, best Steadicam one take, hands down. It's just so dynamic, and it's all in one take. Who misses practical effects, people? Am I right? I love this shot. My dad loves this shot. You all love this shot. You voted for it. Certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. 89% Metacritic.
Shut the fuck up. It's not the only Steadicam shot ever made. Even Swingers did it better. What? No.